Thanks, Ignacio. So this is working. I am very grateful to Annette about a principle that I see with Oh, yeah, I need to have to introduce ourselves. I said I'm Russ Osguthorpe, but that'll do it. I was recently in Bismarck presiding over a temple, was a former faculty member here, oversaw the Center for Teaching and Learning for 7 years. And related to this panel, actually, my first job actually out of grad school was at the National Technical Institute for the Deaf in Rochester, New York. This is an institution that is an institute that's combined with the Rochester Institute of Technology, and the hearing impaired students are often mainstreamed with the rest of the student body in Rochester Institute of Technology. So I was hired there to basically help deaf students succeed in college. These were college students. So that's one part of diversity actually is disability, which Barbara has so much background in, being over special ed in BYU, Hawaii. And while I was there, this is a long time ago, a fellow in State University of New York at Stony Brook, so this is on Long Island, invited me to consult with him, and he was African American, grew up in Harlem, and one day he looked at me and he said, "You haven't had that much experience with African Americans, have you?" And I said, "Actually, I've had none." I haven't had any. And he said, "You're trying to be so careful, I could kind of tell." And that kind of broke the ice, and we had a fantastic relationship over quite a period of time. He was an associate dean there at Stony Brook. And so diversity has kind of always been a part of me. I've worked with different cultures, island cultures. My mission was in the islands of Tahiti. But particularly I spent a fair amount of time in special ed technology, so worked a lot with those with disabilities and how technology could help them. That was kind of pre-life. I tell my wife sometimes we had all these lives. That was one life, and then we went off to other lives as well. But so here's the principle I've been thinking about when I think about how complex a topic this is, diversity and unity. And what the gospel has instilled in me about all of this, and that is everyone's an individual, everyone is a child of God, and our role as educators is, like when we did Come Follow Me, we always used to say we teach to the needs of the learner. And we did that for a long time, and I thought, actually, that's good, it's okay, I like that. But we also need to teach to the gifts of the learner. Every learner is gifted. Doesn't matter if they have some disability or if they're a second language speaker or whatever they've got going for them. Everyone has gifts. Every learner has gifts. Every individual human being has gifts. As educators, if we can help find those gifts, help them identify those gifts, develop those gifts, and I'm not talking about just a gift of musical talent or art talent or something like that. I'm talking very broadly about all kinds of gifts that human beings have. Some people have a gift of listening. Some people have a gift of speaking. Some people have a gift of understanding another person. All kinds of gifts. If we can figure out as educators how to help magnify, develop those gifts, this kind of, for me, washes diversity away. And it doesn't matter what gender, what disability, what ethnic background someone has. What matters is, can we help them improve their gifts and develop what God sent them here to do? Next.
Well, we were talking about the setting in here, and we wanted to know your background. But we want you to be writing down and be asking questions so that this panel is interactive. Because you have heard a lot today. What are some questions you have? We may or may not be able to address it, but that's what this dialogue is about, the conversation. Is this thing even working? Oh, no, this one, that's right. Maybe if you don't understand, oh, you know what? I noticed I did not see any Asians. Did you see Asians here? What is it with this Asian people? Do they not come to, you know, Asians don't do education. They do business and they make money. So, just so you know, yeah, I'm like in the wrong field and in special education. So it's like double brand right there. Yeah. So, by the way, when you talk about language, you know, some people say, well, you're not native speaker, you know, you don't write as well, you don't have, you know, you have this accent. Oh, sorry, Peter is Asian, sorry, Peter. Is that in, at BYU, we try to remind, BYU Hawaii. We try to remind people that language is a gift, it is a strength. People who speak many languages have a lot of ways to learn. So it is not a flaw, it's not a disadvantage, it's a gift, like you say in that. So we're supposed to introduce ourselves. Again, you've read our bio and everything, but I thought I'd give it a background on about, since this panel is about diversity. I'm from Singapore, came to this country at about 23 years old, so I'm 48 now. So, you know, half my life here and there. And I've taught in New York, Texas A&M, at Penn State, in Virginia, and then now in Hawaii. So work with a lot of diverse population and children who are low SES background. I've also lived in Qatar and Turkey. I was there when Osama was killed during the Egypt uprising and Arab Spring, and all of this during my Fulbright. So seeing a different side of people whom you serve and teach and never be able to talk about the church, you know, and all of this thing. And then one of the things that we talk about, we're going to share some principles, and then we want you to ask questions. So I thought, oh well, my very, very first job when I was at Columbia, and I wanted to, you know, get a job, and I went for a job interview in Harlem. And you know Harlem, great, because I did not know anything about Harlem. I just wanted to teach children. So the way the principal interviewed us was put all the 6 candidates together and everybody can hear each other's answer. Wow, what a great way to interview. So very intimidating. And everybody, so I was the second candidate. Somebody said why they are good enough to teach and whatever, and then I say, well, you know, it's close by, I can walk, and this is a great location, all of this thing. And the principal asked me, why do you want to teach in Harlem? I don't get that question. Like, yeah, because it's close by, you know. And say, well, you are a graduate from Columbia. Why do you want to teach black kids who are disabled? And it dawned on me the first time, black kids, I teach kids. I didn't understand why there's an adjective before the kid. I teach kids, I teach children. Why do you have to call them black children or whatever children? I just teach children. I didn't get the job. But she's African American, and she's questioning, and later she told me, well, we don't need that kind of teacher from Teachers College because anybody can teach these kids. So the expectation is, you know, they don't need very much. And sometimes in special education, it feels like that. I said, oh, I want to teach kids with special needs because you don't need very much to teach kids with special needs. Oh my goodness, do not, you know, join the profession. Anyway, so that's my little take on it. And we're going to come back and circle around and talk more about it, but I'm going to pass the mic to
Yes, Ignacio Garcia here. I'm a BYU professor, I've been here 23 years, or almost 23 years. And on the issues of diversity, even before I came here, I was always on the diversity committees and always asked to speak on diversity. And I gave up a few years, not because I don't love diversity or whatever, but simply because sometimes trying to train people on diversity in sort of a 30-minute or a 24-hour training session is not enough. I think there are certain principles that I've always thought about when I think about diversity. One is that there is no such thing as diversity outside of us. We are all part of that diversity. And as if you've noticed over the last few years in the church, we really promoted that, whether it's the I'm Mormon campaign, the We Are One, and numerous other efforts that the church has engaged in. And I think part of it is just the realization that we are a sort of large global community, that we are different, and not only in terms of race, color, gender preference, international, but even among ourselves. And I think that we do a disservice when we forget that we are diversity. And I think whether you teach in a church environment or outside of the diversity, or at least the discussion of us as a global people, and us, I mean by every human being, is so important. For Latter-day Saints, because we go on missions, because we send people across the world, because we are a global church, we have to be very conscious of that. And sometimes I think we're not, simply because we're not aware of other things. And so when you're dealing with diverse populations, and some of you may and some of you may not, it really is a challenge, because you're not sure that what you're saying is being sort of understood the same way. And in fact, it isn't. And you don't have to have people of color or whatever, but if you have that other element, and that is that what you're teaching is being perceived differently by different groups of people. Even in the church, we may teach a particular theological point or doctrine, and later find out that different people perceive it different ways. And also the point is that we may be in a situation in which everybody is, in my ward would be all Latinos, maybe your wards would be all white members, and that they themselves also must deal with the whole notion of diversity, because again, diversity is more than just one particular person. And one of the things that I tell people is that while the gospel provides us certain fundamentals, we're humble, we're sensitive, we're loving, we're kind, all of these things are very important aspects to teaching or dealing with people. The gospel itself does not provide us cultural, racial, ethnic, or gender paradigms. Those are the things we have to learn ourselves. In other words, we have to go out and search and understand how people function. The gospel's not going to teach us that. It will teach us the fundamental. It will provide us certain skills and certain context. But the other is we have to learn. And so I've been thinking a lot about this. Recently, I was I guess elected, although the Mormon History Association, we say we elect, but really we appoint. But anyway, I was recently appointed the president-elect of the Mormon History Association. And I see it as a very global community. And I realized that as we chatted in the panels that we had, the discussions, that we don't fully understand each other. And even I'm a diversity expert, right? And so I hear this incredible young woman from India talk about Hindu Mormons. What's a Hindu Mormon? Right? And then I thought, well, I know what a Hindu Mormon is. Because in my community, there's a lot of Catholic Mormons, or a lot of Protestant Mormons, or a lot of working class Mormons, or a lot of whatever. And so I realized that even though I talk about diversity and I teach about Latinos, I teach about African Americans, I don't know anything about Hindu Mormons. And I sat there with the chair of the Shoshone tribe and a chairman of and then a chairman of the Navajo tribe. And they talked about their LDS experience. I'm thinking, well, I read some stuff. I really don't know very much about the Navajo or the Shoshone experience. And it made me think about, if you notice how the church in its website has begun to put a lot of articles and information, it's to sort of prepare us for this sort of larger context. And I thought to myself that we need to really become diverse in the way we study, in the way we read the scriptures, in the way we teach the gospel, in the way we learn the gospel. I think we do need to, and I tell friends of mine, sometimes they don't take it as nicely as it's meant to be, but I said, we gotta leave Nauvoo. We gotta leave Kirtland. We need to get to India, to Asia, or to the southern states, or Mexico, or the islands. We need to know about each other. I'm always telling my friends from the church history department, when are the volumes of somebody else going to come out? I love Joseph Smith. He was, the story of Joseph Smith is what converted me. But we do need to go beyond those things, right? And so the one principle I think I want to say before we open it up and discuss is that we read the scriptures. And if you think about it, as a lot of these things, and as religious people, we've already been studying diversity. Think about Paul and his mission across his own world. Then you want to talk about the issues and the challenges and the sort of adjustments that he made. Read about Alma and the people he had to go and teach. Read about the prophets. Read about Joseph Smith and his work among Native Americans. We need to begin to see, when we read the scriptures, not just say, and we're often told, put your name there, right? This scripture is mine, and put in your life, in the context of your life. Well, I want to say, don't do that. Put it in the context of somebody else's life. Doesn't matter who it is. Put it in the context of somebody else, especially someone you may not know too much about. And then say, how do they receive the gospel? What do they understand of this or that? How would I live if I was on the other side? If I was being talked about in the scriptures? How would I react to it? And then you begin to get a little glimpse of how diversity both challenges us and also expands us. Okay? But think about that. That's really what it is. We're trying to get you to think about the church society in a much more complex way. And I would say to you, as frightened as certain people are, as frightened as white Latter-day Saints are about changes, so are people of color. Right? There is no monolithic people of color that sort of come in and they all think the same way and they sort of, they're in sort of dominant. Just this, right? Because diversity change challenges us to look at it. So I'm going to stop there, and then let's see what questions you might have or thoughts. If at all, we need to, we'll continue talking, but hopefully ask us some questions. Let's do that.
I'll just you kind of spurred something in me that when we were developing the Come Follow Me curriculum, we had all kinds of opinions flowing forth about how it would work with different cultures. In other words, if we're trying to have more contribution by the students rather than a straight lecture from the teacher. And people would say, I know the Hispanic culture, it is going to be difficult there. Somebody would say, I know the Filipino culture, it's going to be difficult there. It's not in their makeup to do this like this. So we said, rather than just kind of making that decision blanketly like that, why don't we see how things go and watch the pilot tests. Some of the very best examples I saw of, one was in Oaxaca, Mexico. Unbelievable example of great teaching. And this teacher understood the Come Follow Me principles as well as anybody I ever saw anywhere in the world. And then we got another one from the Philippines that was just totally amazing. And I thought, well, sometimes we think we might understand the cultures, and we never want to let that sell short what we do as educators. You never want to let somebody say, well, Native Americans are just not going to do that. Navajos just don't think like that. You say, hey, actually, let's not do that. Let's never, ever do that as educators.
If you're loud enough, I don't know.
I can probably talk about it. So my question is one that I've been thinking about for a long time, but if education opportunities in this country are largely stratified by race and class, and theologically or scripturally, why should Mormons care about that? Or what should be the Mormon impetus to get involved? you guys can think of a scriptural or theological point that would push you and your Mormon conscience toward getting involved in
Galatians, to the Lord, there is not man or woman, the male or female, or bond or free, or black or white. Yes, there definitely is scriptural support for this. We have to be on the vanguard. We have to be out there. We have to be helping people understand each other.
I think that the reason why is because I think it's Brother Wilcox. He mentioned about who best to sort of understand the world. And I think that if we're going to take a message which we believe to be a universal message, right? I mean, that's the thing we harp on. It is a universal message. It is not a message of a particular group. And yet we struggle to have the messif delivered by the messenger. In other words, the weakness is not in the message, but it is a weakness is on. If we're all, as President Nelson said recently, if we just focus on the fact that we're God's, the Father's children, and so I think there's a real need for us, if we don't have it, to have that sense that this is a gospel we take everywhere, and we need to be confident that, as Russell said, that people can take the purity of the gospel and make something good of it. I think if there has been failure among ourselves, institutionally and otherwise, is that we've always framed the gospel with a lot of our cultural baggage, our cultural and theological, not doctrinal, but theological baggage. And it's wonderful to think about how Paul and Alma were just going across and they were just delivering the gospel without a lot of, I'm sure there's a little cultural thing there, but, and that message was picked up and people developed it. And so I think we have to have the faith that one, we're all God's children, and two, they can run with it. Real quick thing. I met the district president from Cuba, and the church is new in Cuba, and he said that they had to deal with the three rules. One, you couldn't have but local clergy. So they had to develop their leadership. So it wasn't about they're waiting, the wards of the church, the time will come when they'll blossom. No, they had to do it then. Second, they couldn't pay anybody or give them any kind of remuneration to come to church. And the third one is you couldn't baptize somebody unless they had gone to church for 6 months. And he said those were the most wonderful rules that you could have. He said we have 99% activation rate. Right? But here was the message that the gospel can work if we trust people.
So this morning I was listening to Jesus the Christ, and it was interesting. I never noticed this part, but because our mind has been thinking about diversity, and Christ always, when he gives example, he brings up the outlying, the prostitute, the beggars, the Samaritan. He didn't go with a large population and say, well, let's flow with this. He will pick the outlier, and that is the example. So I thought that was something interesting because I didn't think about it, second of all, is that I want to talk about the example to add on what Ignacio was saying. When I was teaching in the Middle East, again, I wanted to show something. It's called Dayton's Lake. If you've seen the LDS video. And I want to show that because it's got something to do with disability and all this. But I was told you have to quickly turn it off before the name of the church shows up. So I cannot have any religion notion or whatever. I said, I'm going to do my best. I mean, my hand can only be as fast as, what it is. So of course I showed this video, and these people, a large group of doctors and pharmacy students, they were in tears. They felt something. And I know I cannot mention the church. I just want them to know. When you feel the Spirit, I want you to associate with this video. And that's all I could say. That down the road, whatever it is that happened to the Muslim culture, whatever it is, there is an association, and our job is not necessarily to convert, is let the Spirit do it. We provide opportunities, we open doors, and then let the Spirit and trust the Spirit to do the work. And a principle that I wanted to add on, may not be related to your question, was the sense of self-awareness. Always say, well, your culture has to get to know me, and because I'm a minority. By the way, we put him in here because we thought we should treat him like a minority and he should go first, being white and male and everything. We want to make sure that we acknowledge him. Yeah, and then BYU. So it's that sense of self-awareness. It's that sense of who you are. Because do we think that we are the most normal person? We usually do. When we see somebody say that person is abnormal because we are the most normal person in the whole group. If that person has a problem, it's because they are not like me. So we always put ourselves on this curve and we are that average person. Sometimes we are not in the context, whether it's by race, by religion, by our disability, whatever it is. What is it that we don't have to empathize because you may not know. I may not know your culture entirely. Don't try to empathize, but acknowledge the individual above and beyond the skin color, the race, the religion, the education, the poverty level. Is the individual. Acknowledging doesn't mean you have to empathize. Acknowledging means you are not judging. Okay, and describe, this is the person, versus critiquing something. They are both very different. And these are teaching things. It's not just a diversity or race thing. Describe, I met this person, I get to know this person. Oh, the person is dead. That's the first thing you saw. That was the thing that you were critiquing. And that is where you self-check. Why is it that when somebody asked me to describe Mary, the first thing I thought of was, oh, this person has very poor English. I make a judgment. I wasn't describing an individual. Okay? So anyway, just a thought.
Other questions?
Can I come back to yours just for a minute? So you say kind of what responsibility do we have as LDS people to help, in a sense, do away with discrimination? Is that kind of our question? So I think we have enormous responsibility. I read, so there's not just discrimination against race or gender or whatever. There's also discrimination against religion. There's discrimination against religion in general, and there's discrimination against Mormons. So people actually expect us not to be doing away with discrimination. People expect us to be prejudiced. They expect Mormons to be. I was in a taxi one time and I said, what do you think of when you think of Mormons? He says, cliquish. I said, what do you mean cliquish? He said, you guys, you just kind of like stick together. You don't get out. It's somebody moves in and all these Mormons swarm the Mormon house. It's kind of weird, And you say, oh, actually we see that as a real positive thing about our culture. He saw it as, well, you're just kind of very cliquish. You're not in the general flow of the population. Anything we can do to help dissuade people from having that stereotype, I think this is important. I think it's very critical. There was an article this morning that I read just this morning from Meridian Magazine. Very nice piece on religious freedom and how media kind of casts religion aside as almost something not worth thinking about, not worth talking about, and certainly not worth taking seriously. We can take all these other things seriously, but religion we don't take seriously anymore because it's not kind of in vogue to do that. So what we do, I think, as LDS people, is we say, it's the way we engage with each other outside of our culture, the way we engage with different groups of people, so that they can look and say, you're Mormon? I thought Mormons didn't like this, or I thought Mormons didn't like that. When I was at the National Tech Institute for the Deaf, this woman was being introduced one time. She was on the faculty. And you have to remember, this is a time when ERA was big, so this is equal rights. And the vice president introduced her and said, and Barbara will come and present now, and then Dr. Osguthorpe will come and present after that. And she said, oh, I'm Barbara, and you're Dr. Osguthorpe. Interesting, she really took umbrage at this, which was, she could take umbrage at this. And she was not Barbara, she was Dr. Braverman. And so, a few days later, an LDS friend came and visited our institution. And she saw him, and she had been complaining about stereotyping and stereotyping women, and she saw this fellow, and he was a very quiet guy. After he left, she said, "Was he a member of your church?" I said, "Yeah, he's a member of our."
The best TVs and whatever. It was just simply a stereotype he had, right? It was until I met some of my poor classmates that I realized that this was the case. And of course, they thought that I must have the really nicest knife you could imagine, right? Because all Latinos have knives. So I think sometimes it's sort of, talking about it and then creating situations in which they have to come together. And most young people will come together. Will it work the first time? Will you be successful? No. But I think you build a bridge. And one of the things I think that's so important is that we often throw the responsibility to the individual. So you are the teacher, so you're going to have to resolve this issue. But in reality, it's the collective. We as individuals can do so many things. But if that collective, if that institution, if that group, if that church doesn't understand and value that, that's very hard. It'll wear you out. So I think in a sense it's really slowly but surely bringing people to communicate with each other, but do it honestly and not be afraid. It may start with people just talking about themselves. And then the next stage is to talking about how I perceive you. Usually we always perceive somebody the wrong way, right? And then once somebody sort of talks about how they perceive you, all of a sudden you're beginning to sort of, if nothing else, you're crossing knowledge boundaries. Now I know who you are. Now you know who I am. Now we either debate or come together in the similarities and the differences. And differences are okay. And I think that's important. Differences are okay. I don't have to love everything you do. I just have to get to know you. And so it's difficult. That's the first thing that I'm going to get a lot of bruises and scars from this. But eventually, in the long run, it's going to be better.
Just one little addition. I like to have them talk about it with each other. But there probably are also students in those two groups who others look to, maybe kind of leader types. If you can talk with those first, get their kind of buy-in to this, to kind of get more cooperation, more collaboration, more teams that are mixed and everything, then I think gradually they'll like each other.
Just so you know, there's a stereotype thing that says Asians are never in special education. That's what they always say. I say, I don't know why. Do you think like Asians are immune, which is never ADHD? Because if you're ADHD, it's called, we're persevering. It's just there's a certain stereotype. But the other thing that drives the mind, and we share the same notion, is that Heavenly Father really created one brain. Not a different race brain. It's really the same. We have more similarities than we have differences. And what are the first two rules in mission? Build a relationship of trust and then find that commonalities. Finding the commonalities is more important than why don't you just hash everything out and then we see we are more similar than we are different. And in my book I assigned that different is not less. We are just different. And embrace that difference, and sometimes say, I'm trying to think of strategy, think outside the box. Get rid of the box. There is no box. Let's talk about the topic and the issue, and yes, again, you acknowledge we are different because of our background and our upbringing, not because of the color of our hair and everything. And I want to share a story. Before I came to America, I have never met an African American. Everything I've seen is on the TV. That they are criminals, they are scary, they are, whatever it is, right? Whatever the media tells you. And Law and Order just totally ruined it. I think it ruined it for me. But whatever it is, when I was teaching in Harlem, again, I didn't know about African American. And these people will always say, hi, good morning. I'm like, they're going to attack me. I just think they are trying to be friendly because they have some, and maybe it's the way I'm being brought up. If somebody's nice to you, they want something from you. That's the notion. So I was also told when I came to Hawaii that It's not about the aloha spirit. If somebody's nice to you, don't think they like you. They want something from you. So I never understood this aloha spirit thing. So again, and then when I realized that, wow, I don't know anything about African American. And the first person that I talked to happened to be my stepfather-in-law, Jeff. And Jeff is African American. And the place that I met him was in Osning Prison. Osning in New York, which is a federal prison. He was there for I think murder or something. I don't remember, but it doesn't matter. So we went there, and what you do is that you have to sit there in the square table, and I bring my son there with my husband, my mother-in-law, and we meet Jeff. And Jeff is African American, but beyond that, beyond the setting where we are, is that we have so much fun. It's the place that my son looks forward to all the time, every month, because we get to play board game and we can't go anywhere because we are stuck on that table. You cannot go anywhere. If you want to pee, you have to ask for permission and then you wait your turn. So you cannot even get up to pee. So we are stuck with playing board game for 4 to 6 hours straight. And it was the best thing that all my son remember about Grandpa Jeff is all this wonderful time, regardless of where we are, regardless of the school, whether how poor the roof is dropping, regardless, is that was the best memory that we have of Grandpa Jeff, And even Grandpa himself, who's white, had hardly held my son. This is Grandpa Jeff, who held him in the prison. So we have more pictures in the prison than we have anywhere else. So, and I learned that, wow, African American people are really nice. So he changes my entire notion about African American people. Just to show you.
Any other questions? Yes.
I like the unity part of the title, and Trevor talks a lot about that. I get to teach an online class that's used by BYU Pathway Worldwide, it's at BYU Idaho. So we have campus students, we have students from 70 different countries that take that class, and it's a class on culture, diversity, and education. And I just love every semester watching these students from all over the world get to know each other and be kind of forced to work with each other in groups. And it builds an interesting type of unity within the church that I haven't seen in any other setting. Because if you come to a church school, there's a very dominant, I guess there's even a dominant culture in our online classes, but it's different because you're not physically in that dominant space. And it really is an interesting environment. I'm interested in what you think about the unity aspect, where there's a beauty in diversity, but there's also a beauty in certain types of unity.
One of the missionaries who served with me when I was mission president is African American, and he's now a stake president, probably at the age of 37 or something like that, a young stake president in Phoenix. And when they had this celebration of the revelation on the priesthood, those of you who saw that, you didn't see that, that was just an amazing thing. He came up for that, and we were talking, and his friend, who's done a lot with diversity in the church, he's also African American, he said that the Mormon church is the most unified and most colorblind church on the face of the earth, because we have our units of the church geographic. And that means that if you're, whatever background you have, you're a member of that ward. We don't have black African churches. And so he talks very powerfully about this and how he was immediately accepted and felt unity in a ward, even though he was a minority. So I think this is a lot of, we can build on this. In other words, we can help this happen. Sometimes geographic things make it so that there's not very much diversity, but oftentimes, so like when we lived in Rochester, New York, they took a pie shape, took the inner city, and so you had all socioeconomic levels, races, everything in the same ward. Very powerful.
One of the things about creating unity is that you really have to deal with the things that differentiate you. While that may seem contradictory, you really have to accept people where they're at. You talk about sort of online, so everybody's secure. when they're sitting in their computer, and they know who they are, they're surrounded by who they are. And so when somebody feels secure in who they are, they can go out into the world. You know, they can go out and associate because they're very firm in who they are. One of the things that I sort of have become aware of as I study history and particularly as I study Mormon history, and I'm not a Mormon history expert by any means. If you want one, there's Jessie Embry there over there. She really knows more about Mormon history than I'll ever learn. She's probably forgotten more than I'll ever learn. But the thing is that, and here's where I think the future lies in the church in terms of both diversity and unity. And that is that each group has to find themselves. There's a lot of new young scholars who are dealing with tremendous issues of differences. And one of the things I say in a recent article that I wrote is we have to deal with certain things that both divide us and can bring us together. Our histories are not all equal histories. Sometimes our relationships, when we begin at sort of on first base, really are divided. When I hear the Shoshone chairman, a wonderful Latter-day Saints, is a bishop right now, and talk about his work with the Bear Massacre, I don't know. And he talks about having to deal with those things. He has to tell his people, this happened, we're here. There's a lot of things that happen between the massacre, even though it's not considered a Mormon massacre, but from the massacre to here, okay? They have to deal with it. All people of color have to deal with the realities of their experience in the church. And we have to be able to be open to that. Because the one thing about people of color, at least the few that I know, is that they want to be united. They want the whole of the church. See, the people of color, even activists and whatever, church activists, they don't want to destroy the church. They want to build it. And sometimes I think when we go to conferences, we have other young white scholars, and they're very angry. They're not angrier than we are. We're concerned. We want to make changes, but we do so because we want that relationship, not because we want to be different, right? And so I would say to you, for those of you who teach, in school or whatever, is that you have to realize that there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain. All you have to do is to read the new scholarship by Maori scholars, Haitian Mormon scholars, Native American Mormon scholars, Latino scholars. And we have to accept that that's part of our legacy. But the beauty of saints of color is how faithful they are. See, it takes a lot of faith and love for the gospel to sort of go beyond that. But you want somebody to acknowledge that, okay? You don't want it to be the main thing that sort of divides you, but you want it acknowledged. Once we acknowledge the things we do, then we get past it. Right? It's just, I have a friend he's a Trump voter, and I was a Bernie voter, and we started getting into it for a little while, and then we said, you know what? You were my friends before President Trump came to office. You'll be my friend afterwards, I hope. And so that's the most important. And I think with Latter-day Saints, we have some difficult situations like this, right? I mean, we'd be silly to say, oh, we don't, because the internet has exposed so many things, right and wrong. But when we acknowledge that we are a people evolving, just like our nation is evolving in terms of being more equal and whatever, that we as a church are evolving. I grew up, I grew up at a time when I went to a Latino board, and I remember one of my wonderful leaders, and he was Latino, and he said, Ignacio, do you know that in heaven, the American flag is the one that's out there? and he said, learn your English because that's what we'll be speaking in heaven. Right? And even back then as a kid, maybe I was always going to be a rebel, I thought, oh, that's interesting, that doesn't sort of come across, right? And we say these things. Now I sort of laugh at it, right? Laugh about it. It's somebody who's very, very committed to the nation. But we have to acknowledge that we have evolved from the church, from English being the church language and headed to knowing we'll have a divine language and whatever it may be. Doesn't matter, we'll all speak it.
First of all, I think we should change the class to culture, unity, and strength. Why do you call it diversity? First of all, you divide them before they are even united. So maybe that's another thought. Maybe we should just change this whole thing. And I just wanted to actually reinforce this. Because, like I say, when we compare to ourselves, we always think we are normal or we are more superior. So one of the things is like, please don't correct the Asian accent. This is the way I talk. So people say, why you've been in America for over 20 years? Why don't you talk like the American? Why do I have to talk like the American? Why don't the American talk like me? But first of all, this is the way I talk. This is Barbara. It has nothing to do with me changing. Or when I say something, they'll go, oh, you meant to say this. Hey, you know what? Maybe it doesn't mean American English is the perfect English. You have to learn how to listen to my accent and then develop. So I don't do it deliberately, but I'm saying it's a little bit tricky when you try to change it because you're telling me that you are more superior. You've been speaking English their whole life, so then you must be correct. Don't do that because then you're not accepting me. This is the way Barbara talks. So it's about me, it's not about my culture.
I'm gonna say. So I was in Singapore one time, had this meeting with all these people, Indonesia, Malaysia, India, Cambodia, everything. Had to be in English. So we were all speaking English. Thing that I just hadn't ever thought of. I was the only American, I had Australian, everybody. Got to the end of the day and I thought, this is very interesting. There's no standard accent. I mean, the standard accent here right now is Provo. Because there's more people who live here. But when you're with this mixed group, it has implications for diversity, for unity. We were very unified in this group. They all had to speak English. Some of them were speaking English as a second language. Some of them were not. They were speaking English as their first language, but they have an accent because they, grew up in another country. So to actually look out and say, no, we don't, accent, there is no standard. There is nothing that defines right and wrong the way we talk. We just talk with each other, we communicate, and unity comes.
Well, I told him the whole time I'm going to call him Russ because I can't pronounce his name. And I don't want to attempt it, so no offense. And
So when I was in Spanish-speaking countries, you asked me how to pronounce my name, The Hispanic culture, they say, Osguthorpe. Osguthorpe. And I would say, well, it's close. Osguthorpe. And I would say, no, mi nombre, hermano imposible.
I don't know what he just said. It's not one of the 6 languages that I speak.
Real quick, so we can get more questions. Yes?
Yeah, I think what I've noticed in the church, there's obviously a cultural divide in the church and racial divide, and people are different, right? But I feel like the church members do well, partly because so many of them serve missions and go all over the world, and they know how to integrate a lot better than the average person. But the thing I see that is more difficult for members is diversity in worldliness, diversity in the ability to keep the commandments. And whether that's someone who deals with word of wisdom or homosexuality or other things like that, how do you help build unity in that situation, which I think ultimately is the most difficult challenge?
I know we talked about this. So
I think that we have to acknowledge the differences. And the hardest thing, I think, for Latter-day Saints, and it happens to everyone, is when we go to a place in which the people are in some ways forced or they're in a situation where they have to do certain things that are not normal for us. as a group, regardless of who we are. If you ever go to a home, and I knew this family that had 3 LGBT children, I have 1, had 3. So they had to emphasize the principles that everybody could live, right? They had to talk about the issues and differentiate, but they had to be able to deal with it. I read that Brother Christopherson's, Elder Christopherson's brother, who said that when he would come with his partner to his parents' house, and open the door, they hug him and kiss him, and then they hug and kiss his companion. Now, it takes a lot of really love in the gospel to do that for some people, right? Some people it's just so difficult. To see people functioning and doing that, like for a lot of Latino Mormons, not all of them, of a strong Catholic background, the 12th of December is very special. That is the day of La Virgen de Guadalupe, right? And so how they do it is they just say, that's just their version of Heavenly Mother. So as they connect it to that, then because Mormons don't celebrate Heavenly Mother. Well, Latino Mormons, some of them do. That's their way. Okay, for somebody it may be like, how that. In many ways, we have to transcend those things, both that are not true gospel principles and others which are, in a way, people, and this is where I talk about trust. People often live what I call the circumstantial gospel. That is, because of the circumstances in which we are, there are things that we'll be able to practice that very rigidly, very orthodox, very much in terms of how the church asked us to. And others who have to do the best they can. Right? If you were in East Germany, you couldn't have food storage. In some places you couldn't pay tithing. In some places you couldn't have churches. And because of that circumstance, if you went and met at somebody's house every Sunday for 10 years, and I knew someone who was a mission president in Nicaragua, and the Sandinistas had taken all the churches away. He said our activation, our attendance rate was 20%. They took the churches and went up to 70%. And he said as he was going back and the government was about to return the churches, and he said, well, I wish they didn't return the churches. Because in that sense, that circumstantial gospel experience made them closer. And again, for us to think that you couldn't meet in a chapel, you couldn't have the programs. How many people got scandalized when they did away with, or were doing away with Boy Scouts? There were some of us who were saying 20 years ago, that doesn't work for the whole church. And for churches of color, it was a horrendous problem. And because they couldn't perform the program, they felt like failures. And parents felt like failures. And if their kid wasn't going to be an Eagle Scout, then he wasn't going to go on a mission and he wasn't going to marry the temple. Right? Now, most Latter-day Saints are pretty smart. They'll say, we'll do the best we can. This is how we can practice the gospel. And so I think many times is we have to completely take away everything, even that which is so important to us, that isn't fundamental to the gospel. Can I live with what, St. Paul said to the Corinthians? Can I live with what Alma taught? Can I live with Joseph taught? And if I can live with that, and you can live with that, then you live the gospel. The rest of it are great blessings that we have. You have a temple, fine. I think that's changing. They didn't have temples. And if you didn't go to the temple, or if you didn't do this thing, somehow you were not as good. And we still do that. We may say, oh, you're a great kid. You didn't go to 4-year seminary, institute, BYU, or whatever. And even if we don't mean to say it, we already have that sense that they can't get to where. And I see that, and I think people of color see that. But there's still that sense of, there's a pecking order. We get rid of the pecking order, then we see ourselves as brothers and sisters. And then all of a sudden we understand why people live the gospel, as long as they're faithful and obeying the commandments, right? We're not talking about breaking it. But once we strip ourselves of that, then we begin to say, you know, that person's a really incredible person, and I wouldn't mind serving with them or under them. And so I think we have to strip ourselves to just the fundamental of the gospel. And it's hard for Latter-day Saints here because we have so many blessings of the gospel. We have so many added-ons, right? In the long run, they don't matter, but it is incredibly good to have 2 or 3 or 7 temples around, and you can go, you don't want to go to Tempanogus, you can go to the other one, and other people don't. And we have to judge them based on that.
I think our time is almost out. I wanted to share, how much more time we have? Is it like 1 minute?
20 seconds?
20 seconds, really quick. Then I just want, let's say, we wanted this to be very broad without targeting topics, but of course we talk about same-sex attraction and all of these things. And I just want to share with you that I had a student who studied physics, super smart. He's a white kid, but then he felt this same-sex attraction. He went to tell the honor code, and what happened was, whatever wasn't handled the way it was, he took his own life, and it was very, very difficult for me. And a lot of people say, oh, was it the infrastructure? Was it the church? Was it BYU? All of these things. And I said, well, regardless of that, we are not asked to compromise. We are not asked to negotiate our principle. We are asked to live the higher laws, which is to love the individual as he is. His name is John. To love John the way John is. Without, well, what does the stats say? What does the research say? What does biology say? All of this cloud the higher law. Don't judge. Accept the person as they are and get to know that person. And because of this student, I asked the vice president that I want to talk about this in class because I think it's important to help our teachers understand that they go into classroom with their own values and say, well, but then you're not living. My job is to teach you correct principle. Yes, it is, but at the same time, you're also professional. Accept the student they are. And the way you model it will be the best example for them on how this individual will be treated in society. Okay?
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate it. If you have any more comments or questions, I'm sure we'll be here for a few minutes.
Thank you.